Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be breaking down Friday's price action. I'm going to show you an end of the day markup for basically Thursday evening Asian session and an entry that you could have gotten during London. Price action was really interesting. I really like these setups. One of these I did take, the other one was one I did not take. I'm still recovering from COVID, so I apologize if I cough a lot during this video. I have been trading mostly just Asian session this week so that I can sleep lots, right? So today we're going to go over this end of the day recap. Now, of course, I've already posted all of the screenshots on Discord, so you can go ahead and see these and study them. We're already almost at 500 members. We're 498 members. It's kind of crazy. So we're probably going to hit 500 maybe even by the end of this video. I have all of these that you can go ahead and study in the end of the day markups. So let's get into this video and get started, right? So the idea behind this is basically to show you my thoughts when I'm doing the markups for what my expectation is of the market and then what potential entries we could have, right? So first things first, just on the daily time frame. Let's go ahead and take a look. Here we go. So we can kind of see that we've been pretty bearish for a while, right? This was the last buy to sell that broke structure to the downside. Then we've had this buy to sell that broke structure here. This is still unmitigated, so potentially price could pull up into this area. But before that happens, we still have this area where we could give reactions to, right? So if we look on the 4 hour, because we're trading 4 hour market structure, here's what we can see. So earlier this week, we've had reactions to this 1 hour. This is a 4 hour that we could have refined to the 1 hour. They gave us a pullback into a 1 hour demand, right? And for Thursday leading into Friday, this is the price action that we're basically dealing with. So what we had is a 4 hour break of structure. We had this high, we gave a pullback, right? We formed this low, and then we broke structure to the upside, full body candle closure. We've left behind this 4 hour demand, right? And this is the low of the 4 hour. So the 4 hour is bullish until this goes, right? So 4 hour bullish market structure. Where could we be heading into? Ideally, we would be looking for price to come into this 4 hour point of interest here. Here we have a very large candle where we've stacked plenty of sell orders into that later ended up pushing price lower. This is where we had the reversal point. So from this low to this extreme high, then we break structure. This is the furthest point, the highest point in the pullback. So we would expect a reaction to this area. Not necessarily a complete reversal back alignment bearish, because we still kind of see a reason to go long. And we could see price come up a little bit higher, right? But what we do see is this area is supported. We have a lot of liquidity here that we basically targeted. We liquidated this and we were expecting this to happen. Now I'm going to show you how you could still get a trade off of this, even though the 4 hour was not tapped. And so just to go over these, we have this 4 hour demand, right? This is where we have the 4 hour break of structure. If we look, we can see that there was a 4 hour pause. This is a sell to buy engulfing. Now, all of this was already marked up. I provided this in the EU chat with my markups, and you're going to see how the 15-second refinement in a 1 minute point of interest on the 15-minute point of interest was respected, and that's how you could have gotten this short during the London session. That's kind of what we're going to go over, right? So 4 hour break of structure. Once we get a break of structure, we can expect a pullback. Ideally, we would wait for this to get tapped. Now, if the 4 hour is tapped, we need a 15-minute change of character. So that's just a little reminder, right? So now that we're here, what we're going to do is refine this 4 hour supply, because we really want to know if price is going to come into here. If we get a 15-minute change of character, that's great. But maybe we could even make it easier on ourselves by refining the 4 hour to the 15-minute, right? So we're trying to refine everything that we can as much as possible, right? So heading price up into this area, we're going to refine it. Now, I already have those areas marked up. So what we're going to do is we're trying to make this easier on you by just going to these areas and kind of just breaking it down a little bit easier, right? So let's go to the 15-minute. Here we have, this is the bar replay, right? And sometimes we like to utilize multiple time frames. A lot of times what I notice is that you can get the most clean points of interest by just going up or down by a minute. Here on the 15-minute, we do have this point of interest. It's kind of clean. We have this sell candle that was stacked up, but I did find that the 16-minute provided the best buy to sell engulfing setups. So in this case, we're going to go to the 16-minute time frame, and we're still going to use this as our 15-minute area, but we're just cleaning up our points of interest to so they make the most sense, right? So one thing that we have here is as price is pushing to the upside, we've made this high, we've pulled back, and then we've made a new 15-minute high, right? We've pulled back, we're making more 15-minute highs, right? This is basically the extreme of this pullback before we make this high, right? Then we end up making another one up here. So technically, what we could say is because this low made a new high, which is up here, right? We could technically say that if this goes, this is a 15-minute break of structure. So here, we're going to go and mark this as a 15-minute bottom break of structure. And I apologize if I'm speaking too slow. You can speed it up, right? So this is the 15-minute. We've formed a new high, right? This is the extreme of the pullback from this high to this extreme of the pullback low to this high, basically, right? So what we're looking for is to narrow our 4-hour zone. So this is a clean 4-hour. This is basically the wick that was pushed down where we're stacking sell orders. And here on the 16-minute, we can see we have two clean points of interest. We have, first of all, the first one here, the first buy to sell that's engulfing, and it has left behind an imbalance. That's important because this is a sign of high volume injected sell orders, enough that we've left behind an imbalance and that we're going to cause a break of structure, right? So here, this is the one, it's at the equilibrium of this 4-hour, right? So this is a good confluence for us is to understand that this is right around the EQ. So this is the first buy to sell engulfing that we get. And we do see that we have inducement of liquidity for this point of interest. So this is a very valid place to look for an entry. Now, if you would look for the 4-hour to be tapped, at the minimum, this would have to be tapped here, right? But one thing that we do see is we have just underneath the 4-hour right here, which if this gets tapped, we don't necessarily need the 4-hour to get tapped, but this is still partially inside of this 4-hour point of interest, right? It's just at the bottom point. So if the 4-hour gets missed, which it did, if this gets tapped, that's enough for us to take an entry, right? So here we see a buy to sell engulfing. This is engulfing, it left behind an imbalance, and this directly caused a break of structure. So buy to sell engulfing broke the 15-minute structure, right? Because here we have this high, we make this extreme pullback, we do end up with a new high, right? We fail to make new 15-minute highs. This is the furthest point in the pullback, so this is considered strong and protected. When this goes, what we basically have is a flip. So technically there's a demand in here that we've already given a reaction to, right? But technically we still have more areas in here that we could give more taps to. We've tapped again into that demand zone. We could even mark it out something like this, right? This could be what it looks like. So we've given a last tap. It swept these wicks lows, right? Tapped pretty much almost equal low, but into that demand, gave us a flip, and broke 15-minute structure. So this is the point of interest that we are really focused on. Now, price did come back in to tap this point of interest. Technically, we could say that we could use this buy to sell engulfing. This could be the point of interest. Now, what I would like to focus more on the body in this case. And although we did get a somewhat mitigation of this point of interest, technically, the 50% equilibrium has not been tapped. And so to me, I still consider this valid until I see a mitigation of this point of interest. So now that I have my refinements on the 16-minute time frame, Don't be afraid to change time frames because the 15-minute would not have shown you a clean point of interest, right? So that's what's very important about this. So now that we're looking at the 15-minute, right, now that we've marked our point of interests, now what we can do is take a look at the chart here. So, for example, if we look at these refinements here, once we've had this 4-hour break of structure, price is now heading into the 4-hour supply. Now you can see that just shy of that point of interest, we failed to tap the 4-hour. But because we did give our refinements, we do see this getting tapped. Now, the 16-minute point of interest gets tapped just to the bottom. And when we're in a 15 or 16-minute point of interest, let's just call it 15-minute, right? We cleaned it up on the 16. All we need is a 1-minute change of character to give us a sign of its bearish intentions, right? And so now let's go and focus more on this specific point of interest. So let's do this. We're going to do this and zoom in here. We have a lot of areas that we could cover here. So specifically looking at this 15-minute point of interest now looking at this on the 15-minute time frame, right, we can begin to look for potential entries. Now, we could get a 1-minute change of character in here, and I believe we do, and I believe there is an entry there. But what we're going to focus on is, because this is Asian session, I'm going to show you the trade that I took during Asia. So here we have this high, we pull back, this is the extreme of the pullback, and we form a new high. This new high taps into this refined supply zone. So all we need is a 1-minute change of character to take an entry. Well, let's say we didn't get that, right? Let's just say we're focusing on waiting for the higher time frame to go a little bit more bearish because we still are waiting potentially for the 4-hour to get tapped. So maybe we're building liquidity here. Maybe we didn't have this refined, and so some of us would still be waiting for let's say the 4-hour to be tapped if we didn't have that zone refined, right? So what we could do is we could wait for a 15-minute change of character to signal potential bearish intentions, right? So this is technically a strong low because this broke structure to the upside, so this should be respected. Now, where you want to draw this demand, you can draw covering the entire candle, or I like to focus more on the wick. Sometimes what I like to do, and this is a little trick, I look left and I see what area of the wicks have not been covered yet, because sometimes price can be refined into something like that, and that's what I did myself. Now in this case, just to keep it simple and not confuse anybody, we're going to use this whole 15-minute wick. So what we do know is that this is the furthest point in the pullback, but just before we broke 15-minute structure with a full body candle closure, we have this sell to buy engulfing. In these wicks is where the concentration of volume was injected, and that's when we get that break of structure that taps into that supply. So if we were going to wait for a 15-minute change of character, this sell to buy that made this high would have to go. Now, if you look to the left, this wick down sweeps liquidity to the left, right? So this is a very good point of interest to be focusing on. So this is the 15-minute, and what we do see here is as a reaction to this tap of this 15-minute point of interest, we have a buy to sell, and these wicks are a little bit more clean. We have buy to sell engulfing wicks that directly give a change of character. They create a failure of the 15-minute demand. We don't really get a reaction to this area that's visible on the 15-minute, but we do get a change of character. Now, that is expected in a way because we do have potential reaction that we could expect more from the extreme. So we could get a change of character and still give a reaction to this extreme wick and then push to the upside and tap the 4-hour. So what we want is a confirmation by also seeing a 15-minute break of structure. And this is how I took my entry. So this was the extreme furthest point in the pullback. We had this high. This is the extreme of the pullback. We formed this new high. So if this goes, then I see a 15-minute demand failure and I am looking for an entry. So this is how I got my entry. Once we see this wick pierce through, I'm already watching the 5-minute time frame at that moment, and I see this buy to sell engulfing. So I want to see this get tapped to take shorts, but also understanding that when I'm in Asian session, I may not get a pullback like that for an entry. Sometimes price is a little bit lazy in Asian session, so I've learned how to trade it a little bit differently. And that's why I'm going to show you this trade because it's kind of unique, and a lot of people probably would not have taken this trade because it looks a little bit low probability, but it's still valid and it makes complete sense. So we're going to drop to the 5 minute, and I'm going to have to scroll back to get to this time frame here. So we're now on the 5 minute. 1 second here. Let's see. 5 minute. And let's see, should I hide the 15 minute? No, I guess I'll keep it like that. So now that we're on the 5 minute, here's what I can see. Ideally, I would like to take shorts from this zone, but I understand that while we're in Asian session, price is usually just going to be more low volume, and it's not really going to give any big pullbacks. A lot of times what we're going to see is price is going to be on a lower time frame continuation in Asian session. And so what I'm looking for when I'm trading Asian session is for lower time frame continuations, right? And what I can expect is likely this will be saved for later in the session, could be during London, right? So once the 15 minute goes bearish, we have a 15 minute break of structure. When we get a 15 minute break of structure, I can already expect a pullback. But understanding that the pullback that I can expect is going to be low volume, I'm looking for a clean point of interest on the 5 minute. And I can already see here that we have buy to sell engulfing 1, buy to sell engulfing 2 that are making new lows. So I can see a potential supply chain forming. And this is the third one that's basically tapped into this supply chain. We have 1 buy to sell engulfing, buy to sell engulfing, new low, right? Internally, right? Buy to sell engulfing breaks structure here, right? Now we get a wick, we don't get a body closure below there on the 15 minute yet, but we can be aggressive and take an entry, understanding that on the 5 minute, we have a lot of imbalance to fill to the left. The 15 minute is bearish with a 15 minute change of character. We would want to take a trade from up here. We give a 15 minute break of structure, but the 5 minute is showing clean continuations. We have 5 minute break of structure here. This high is protected. Price pulls back into premium territory, comes in to tap the 5 minute buy to sell wicks, right? Then what do we see? 5 minute break of structure to the downside. What's price going to come into? An unmitigated 5 minute in a supply chain. This is high probability for me. And when I look to the left, I can see that here we have the imbalance to fill. This point of interest, these wicks, do not have any inducement. And so likely this point of interest is going to be liquidated. Now, understanding this, I have multiple targets that I could look for depending on how aggressive I want to be with this trade. Meaning that I could target the top of these wicks, of these sell to buy wicks engulfing. I could target just underneath here. And I can also target a liquidation of this specific point here and see if price will come into this wick. And I don't really want to be too overly aggressive and continue further down at this moment, because knowing Asian session, this could be enough to give us a buy signal to go long again. So this is the 5 minute that I'm focusing on. It's a doji candle that it was engulfed that broke structure directly. 5 minute bearish order flow. While this could be considered lower probability, it's very low in the leg. It's Asian session, so I understand that that could give me my potential trade. So what we're going to do is we're going to see what this looks like on the 1 minute time frame. So I took my Asian session entry on the 1 minute time frame. So let's wait for this to load. Here we go. And this was my 1 minute Asian session here. So what we can see, if we zoom in here to this 5 minute point of interest, we can see that this is where we have a pullback on the 1 minute. So we make this low, price pulls back, makes this extreme, and then breaks structure to the downside. We broke 5 minute structure. We can see we made a new 1 minute low. And what we do have is we have a little pause in the market here. And this could serve as in range liquidity, right? So before we broke here, we have some liquidity inside of this range, right? That could serve as inducement for a point of interest here. Now, if I really want to be aggressive, I could take a 1 minute entry off of this, right? But what I could also see is price could potentially liquidate this specific area and come into this wick. So without having to go on the seconds, I can take an entry comfortably here. And so what I did is I set a limit just to cover enough of these little dojis in here. So this is my entry. So here we can see the 1 minute refined where the commitment short was. This is where we pushed to the downside. We gave a little potential flip in here on the seconds time frame and then broke structure. So to me, this would be liquidated. The 5 minute point of interest was very clean, a doji that got engulfed. So I wanted to see price come into there. So I set a limit and I was triggered. So here we have I took a 1.5 pip stop loss for myself. So my spread was pretty big on Asian session. So that's what I took mine with. But we could be aggressive, and depending on your broker, a 1 pip stop loss is enough. Now, whether you were waiting for this low of the range to get tapped, like I was, when you can't see, depends on your brokerage, right? So on my broker, you can't always see price action this clean. And so what I'll do is I might set a limit at the bottom of the range when I'm targeting a refined zone like this, if it's like 0.3 pips or something smaller. Like this is 0.1 pip. So depending on spread, if your spread would have expanded a little bit, you could have missed it or not. So I set mine at the bottom of the range. This is how I was triggered in. Now, if you were waiting for this to get tapped, you could have waited for that one, and this is probably where you would have gotten your first entry. But this is all valid nonetheless, and that's why we give it a sizable stop loss to cover this in case these get liquidated, right? We have this low, creates a pullback, the high here, and then we break structure to the downside. So now that we're on the 1 minute time frame for our execution time frame, we're now observing 1 minute structure to manage our trade. Now we're also understanding that we're trading 5 minute, let's say 5 minute structure, and that's going to be, let's say, 1 minute order flow, and 1 minute order flow is going to give us change of character on the 1 minute bullish. It's going to go back bearish and then it might go bullish, right? But we're understanding that we have a target in mind. And so we're expecting that if we're getting it at a 5 minute point of interest, that we're probably going to be able to target a 5 minute demand zone with some accuracy here, like this one down here, right? So 5 minutes going to target our 5 minute point of interest. So we get in on the 1 minute, 1 pip stop loss, break structure to the downside. Ideally, I would not want to see a breaking body closure above this wick. We don't get that. We get a small sweep that comes in to tap the 1 minute because this one was not satisfied. We still had an imbalance to fill. This filled that imbalance. Then we immediately have a push to the downside. I'm monitoring at that moment basically this swing leg. I'm understanding that here we have a flip buy to sell engulfing, and I would not really like to see this get pierced. I'm waiting for this to be protected. Now after this 1 minute break of structure here, confirmation, then you could be comfortable setting it to break even. In my case, I don't like to set trades to break even because I understand that a lot of times when we tap a point of interest, we leave one behind. And so if I set an entry like this one, and I set to break even once we have this 1 minute break of structure, you would have gone stopped by this sweep that was like a 0.2 sweep or whatever, and you would not have gotten your entry. You would have lost, and you would have missed out on 20 plus R. And so what I do is I cover the high. So once this broke structure to the downside, I covered it by half a pip. So that's what I covered it by. And so once that happens, I'm covering the high and I'm covering this, and I'm not expecting this to get taken, but if this gets tapped, that's fine. So I stayed in the trade with this. Once price broke structure to the downside, I can see that we're realigning with some more volume. We make this low, and I took profit pretty early in my trade. I took about 14 pips of profit, but that's because I was being aggressive and I had to do a lot of other stuff that day. But this is how the trade makes sense, and that was my target overall. You can see it in the Discord. We make this low, price comes in, sweeps. Here we have a 1 minute break of structure bullish. But we also understand that this is a swing to the downside, and technically this is the high that breaks the low. So we can see a pullback coming up into this area anyway, and we're covered with a half a pip stop loss, right? Or break even at this point now that we've had a couple more breaks. Managing this trade, we get a sweep, and then price just starts melting to the downside and takes out the point of interest on the 5 minute. this would have been a pretty safe take profit. And on this, with the 1 pip stop loss, you could have an easy 24-hour trade. Now me, with my 1.5 pip stop loss, I took just under 10R myself, as I took profit early. So I took about 10R on this one. But that's basically how this trade worked. That was the Asian session trade on the 1 minute using a 5-minute point of interest. Here's where you can see the 5-minute point of interest, very clean. 5-minute break of structure to the downside. And then this is the one that broke structure. We see the supply chain forming. Makes sense to take a trade like that. A lot of confluences for that one. Aside from it being low probability, low on the leg, and in Asia session, this is why we shouldn't be afraid to trade during Asian session. There's a lot of trades available. You have to understand how to stack the odds for your trade and justify it. It makes sense. It makes sense, right? So now let's look at the next session. So let's go ahead and move time frames. We're going to now look for our entry. You can see that after price tapped that 5-minute, we did have a pullback as London session was about to begin to open. And so you can see the price pulled back up. Here, this was an entry that was available during late London and just pre-New York. I'm going to show you that specific entry. So let's get into that section here. All right, so where are we looking at? Let's go to here. New York, 15 minutes, 1 minute refinements. Awesome. Okay, so here's what we're going into. So now we have to understand what's our expectation for London. We have a 15-minute change of character, 15-minute bearish break of structure. This was the high, this was the low of the leg, and we pulled back, right? We fell to make a new low, and then we see another pullback continuing. This was the 4-hour buy to sell or sell to buy wicks that were engulfing that broke structure. So in my mind, this would be an area that we could target potentially for a liquidation. Let's look at it on the 4-hour. This is the wicks, right? A lot of people are going to ignore something like this. You don't have to refine it on the 15-minute. This makes sense. This is likely to get liquidated. We don't have inducement for this point of interest, so we could just sweep that and then continue up higher. So when I mark that up on the EU markups, pre-session markups, that's what I was looking for, right? And you can see that's what happened. This is the exact same point of interest from the markups that I sent. So what we want to do now is same as earlier. We can expect a good chance that we're going to have a reaction from here. We have not yet mitigated the range that gave us the 15-minute change of character, right? We basically just melted here before and tapped that 5-minute point of interest. We've respected it here, the wick of the 15-minute. And so we can expect likely this area is going to hold. Now, we have the 4-hour point of interest above. The question is, could we sweep all of this liquidity and then tap the 4-hour? Yes. But at the moment, the 4-hour does not need to be tapped. In fact, what we can be seen as building right now is liquidity. We're building inducement for this 4-hour point of interest. There's a lot of reasons why we would be doing that, and potentially we could see this come in tapped at the beginning of the next week, and maybe even give it a nice respect and sweep more liquidity to the downside and tap the 4-hour demand. We'll see what happens. So at this moment, we have this 15-minute candle here. Basically, we have the buy candle here, but this is the what broke out of the range. So we have buy to sell wicks. What I want to do now is I want to refine this point of interest specifically to the 1 minute. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop to the 1 minute time frame and focus on this specific zone. Let's see. Takes a moment here. I'm going to pause it and then I'll unpause it when it loads. Okay, so here we are. This is basically the 15-minute, and we're now looking at it on the 1 minute time frame. So what we want to do is we want to understand what's happening here. So this is going to be the same as the markups that I sent last night pre-session. So here you can see This was the 15-minute, and we have two 1-minute zones with 15-second points of interest in here. And you can see that at the end of the session, you can see that we had a respect of this 1 minute. So we're going to show you how to get those specific zones, right? So here we are in the 1 minute, and it's easy to get overwhelmed with points, with lots of point of interests. And so what we're going to do is we're going to simplify it by marking up our price action. So what we can see is this was the initial tap of the 16-minute point of interest, right? And we have a 1 minute change of character internally in here where we could have gone and trade, but it would not have, that would have been overly aggressive, right? So we're not focusing on this area for Thursday trading, that we're trading Friday. So what we can see is what point of interest here is the highest probability where price can come back into. So first things first, here we're looking into this 15-minute point of interest. This is what we can see on the 15-minute. So when we go to the 1 minute, we're looking for the last low that made a high. So we had this high, we pulled back, we make this low, we failed to make this high, so we're respecting this. We give another pullback, and this low makes this high, right? And so now what we see is technically we have this low made this high, wick high, right? So here we have this is technically protected and strong. So when this goes, we have a buy to sell engulfing, right? We don't yet take the low. We have a pause in the market here, which right underneath this liquidity. So technically there's a demand here, and we form what could be a flip, right? Now what we could do is we could focus this entire zone like this. We could also, kind of like I mentioned before, is we can kind of go underneath these wicks or these candle bodies and treat this as the area that we get the reaction to. We form a flip, right? On the seconds, we probably take some liquidity. On the 1 minute, we just have this wick where we stack more sell orders, and we officially get our first 1 minute change of character. So this low made the high, so we took the high, then we took the low. So technically, this is the 1 minute extreme here. So this is a high probability extreme. If price is going to come into this area, we have these points of interest where we could potentially respect this extreme. Now, what we have to understand, though, is that while this buy to sell engulfing is part of the cause that broke structure, right? Technically, this is the low that went the 1 minute that we did break structure, because this low ended up creating this high, right? When this goes, we have full candle body closure here. So this is where we have a 1 minute break of structure that made this high, right? What we could say is that technically this is the true supply that caused the change of character, because the extreme didn't really do anything. It was the flip, the decisional, that gave the direct change of character. And so technically we could say that maybe this area would be respected, right? That's what caused the change of character. Now, after making this low, we gave a pullback, and this specifically swept the decisional. So now that we swept the decisional, now we're forming another point of interest that takes liquidity. This is a liquidity point of interest. So we swept the decisional, then we have a buy to sell engulfing, right? That has an imbalance, still has an imbalance, but directly does not yet break structure. We have another pause in the market, and we could see this as another flip, right, on the 1 minute. So here we give a reaction to this sell to buy engulfing. This buy to sell engulfing pushes price into this demand. Excuse me. This point of interest sweeps liquidity as a reaction, forming a flip, and then we have this buy to sell wicks that break structure to the downside, and we here have a 1 minute break of structure bearish. So this, technically, we can say, well, this is a good supply, right? It makes sense because we have some injection of, let's say, momentum and volume that created an engulfing candle. This is where we have an interaction. Here we had an interaction that got swept, right? The extreme failed to do anything. The flip has interaction between buyers and sellers. It sweeps liquidity, right? So this is the true supply that caused the 1 minute break of structure. It's a decisional. And so now we have 3 1 minute points of interest that we could look for. Technically, these two would be higher probability, but the extreme is always going to be valid. right? Now what I could also do is I could refine this to the 15 seconds, and so that's what we're going to do here. Let me pause it and make sure everything's aligned. Awesome, so everything's aligned now. So here we have the 1 minute, and now we're going to drop to the 15 second. Now you can drop to the 30 second, the 15 second, the 5 second, whatever you want. A lot of times I find that 15 second points of interest are a little bit more clean, and sometimes if I want to refine it a lot further, I will go down to the 5 second, but it's not necessary, right? Even then, we have high quality 1 minute points of interest that are 1.6 pips, about 1.5 pips, less than 1.5 pips. So these are really strong. So a 1 minute point of interest, if this gets tapped, we need a 5 second 5 second change of character to get an entry. Now if you want to have more confidence, you could drop these even further to be more aggressive. And for me, a seconds point of interest that's refined, if that gets tapped and I see a V-shaped recovery, that's all I need to take my entry. So I can be more aggressive with seconds refinements. So now what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at this chart now in the 15 seconds. These are specific points of interest. So you can see the 1 minute. We're going to focus on these two, right? This is the 1 minute zone. This is the 1 minute zone. And when we hide the 1 minute, we see these specific 15 second POIs. So here we have, this is the demand, sell. This is a buy to sell, right? We make this low. And then this is the sell to buy that makes this high, that sweeps liquidity, takes the decisional that was part of the flip here, right? And so we have a couple points here. We can see here where we have basically we have a buy to sell that's engulfing here internally. For the 15 second, you could potentially refine it to something like this. In this case, I'm focusing on the buy to sell range. This is the buy to sell range that got engulfed, right? Didn't take any liquidity, so lower probability. But here we have a tap of the top of this range. Now, on the 1 minute, this is a sell to buy. That's very clean. On the 15 second, we can kind of see the specific area where we have our first engulfing. So here we have, this is a buy to sell. We have basically an inside bar candle in here, right, that gets engulfed. Now, what I like about this one specifically on the 15 second is that this 15 second engulfing directly breaks structure in here, right? So that's good, right? But then we pause, and then what do we have? We're giving a flip. So we basically have two reactions to this demand. This initial one that sweeps liquidity and gets engulfed in itself. But then we have this one, which is another 15 second. This is the last buy to sell that directly broke structure. And so in this case, the extreme did engulf and break into this range. But what we do see is that when does this demand fail? This demand fails as a result of the last buy to sell. This is the last buy candle before we see a failure of this demand. So in my mind, I'm focused on these 2 points of interest, and if these get swept, I'm looking here. Now what I do like is that I see inducement of liquidity just below this point of interest. So to me, I can see that this could serve as inducement for this point of interest. This could serve as inducement for this POI. And I'm not really a big fan of this one in particularly because this isn't the one that broke demand. This one directly broke demand. There's no buy candles in here until after we break that we get this pullback. So to me, now I have my refined 15 seconds. And so now I've refined a 15-minute point of interest to 1 minute points of interest to 15-second points of interest, right? So that's basically what I'm looking for. So now what I'm waiting for is price to come in and tap that point of interest. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take off this bar replay, and I'm going to show you 2 entries that you could have taken. If you're somebody who doesn't use seconds, I'm going to show you where you could have gotten a 1 minute entry off of this reaction, and then I'm going to show you, if you are a seconds trader, how you could have taken this refinement. Now, did I trade this? No, I'm still getting better from COVID, so I'm not trading early morning or late at night. I'm only trading Asian session this week. And I've done pretty well with Asian session. I've had a couple good trades already this week, and I took the first one that I showed you in this video. right? So here we are on the 1 minute time frame. So now what we're going to show you is if you, let's turn these on first, right? All right, so this is what I'm seeing. So 15-second respect of, this is the first 15-second. And we got a V-shaped recovery, right? Aggressive reaction, pushing price low, took a change of character. We can get a seconds entry off of this 15-second POI, right? But if you did not refine it to the seconds, you need a 1 minute change of character. So let's say if all you had was a 1 minute zone, how would we have traded this? Well, what we're going to look for is the last sell to buy that makes a high, right? So this is a sell to buy candle, sell to buy engulfing, that pushes price into the 15-minute point of interest and the refined 1 minute point of interest. So you could take a seconds entry with the 1 minute, but if you didn't, right, or let's say you didn't even have the 1 minute and you only had the 15-minute, once the 15 minutes tapped, you need a 1 minute change of character. So what we're going to do is look for a chotch, flip, or a change of character and where we could have taken an entry from. So here we have our 1 minute change of character, sell to buy, right? This takes the high and then it takes the low. So this is where we have a 1 minute bearish change of character. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the high of the range and the low of the range, and I'm waiting for price to pull back. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to come into. Technically, I don't see a clean flip. I don't really see any points of interest that sweep liquidity here, but I do see where we have a little pause in the market before we continue to the downside. So I could maybe even see this as a kind of like a low quality flip on a lower time frame. Not really a fan, but we don't have a pullback into premium. So when we make this low, you can see we're kind of pausing in the market here. We're kind of deciding what's going to happen next. Once we have this buy to sell engulfing, we break 1 minute structure to the downside. Now we have a new 1 minute swing. So I'm just trying to follow along, finding where I could potentially take an entry. This is the buy to sell engulfing. We make this low. So I want to see price come back into premium and potentially get an entry here, right? So what we do see is here we have price kind of hesitating a little bit. We have a sell candle here that then pushes price long. We have several buy candles pushing price into the premium territory, but we don't see anything to our point of interest. Price does not come to the extreme. Now, we do have in here a point on the 1 minute that sweeps liquidity to the left before continuing to the downside and breaking structure. So I could potentially see an entry off of this. It's very low quality, but if something comes into here, I would take it, right? Now on the 1 minute, we do find that we don't get an entry until about 5 a.m., which would be right around 1 hour after New York, which is in New York session. So 1 minute entry would have presented here. We make this low. Once we break to the downside, we give a pullback, and in here price is kind of messing around, but we do have a clean buy to sell engulfing. Here we have buy to sell engulfing with an imbalance, right, that then breaks structure to the downside. And so now we have, this is where we have 1 minute break of structure, right? So we know that ideally what we're focusing on is we want to take a trade in this 1 minute range, somewhere in here, right? And now where we have the best chance of getting the trade would be at the extreme. Here's where we have the sell to buy. This is the buy to sell engulfing. This would be the range I want to take an entry off of, and I would like to see price come into these wicks because that's directly where we have the buy to sell engulfing wicks that created this imbalance, right? So that's going to be my focus. And so how I'm going to take this trade is I'm going to wait for price to come into this point of interest. Now, I could set a limit on this and I would take a 1.5. The reason why is because all I need to cover the actual wicks that are the area that got engulfed is 1 pip, and I can even cover the high of that with about 1.5 pip stop loss, and that's good enough for me. Now you can also see that we get a 1 minute bearish change of character in here. We do sweep internally these entries here, but then what we do is we get another bearish change of character. So multiple opportunities to get an entry. Technically what we have here, if we look at this, here we push to the downside, we make a new high. We could mark, this is the extreme of that pullback. Let me mark this out as the change here. So we could have also taken another entry in here. We could have taken the equilibrium of something here like that, and we could have loaded up and taken the secondary entry. These would all be valid 1 minute entries. This would have been a risk entry. This would have been your confirmation entry. Anyways, you can get in with a 1.5 pip stop loss, and you can see that where we would ideally want to be targeting would be this 4-hour point of interest. Now, this is the 4-hour POI wicks. We can target the equilibrium, but there's a high chance this can go lower, and so we would even like to target potentially just the direct liquidation of that point of interest, because we're not going to get a reaction off of it. Now, that would be a clean 28-hour trade, right? If you would have targeted the top of that range, right, to be conservative, 22-hour, had you targeted the equilibrium, 25-hour, still beautiful trade, right? Now, the thing with this is we don't get a trade until New York with the 1 minute time frame. But I'm going to show you how you could have taken a 5-second entry inside this refined zone that would have been a much better trade with double the RR, right? So now let's drop to the seconds time frame. And the reason why we're dropping to the seconds time frame is because we have this here. So if you remember, let me see, I'm going to drop to the 5-second. So let's give this a second to load. Excuse me. All right. Sometimes these seconds take a little bit of time to load here when we're recording. Let's see. I'll pause it and I'll bring it back when it's loaded. Okay, so we're back. So now here's what we're looking for. So we have a 1 minute point of interest. If you have a 1 minute point of interest, we need a 5-second change of character to be prepared to take a trade short. Now, what you can do, right, if you get a respect of a seconds refinement inside the 1 minute, I'm very aggressive when I trade this. And so if I would have seen an immediate respect of this, I would have just hit the button and taken an entry somewhere in this push to the downside. And more than likely, I'm confident that it will not be violated and it will hold. Now, it doesn't always happen. In this case, the 5S would have been the wise thing to wait for because we do have a couple other 15-second zones. Now, usually what you'll find is with these seconds refinements, usually if they're not going to be valid, they're going to be immediately pushed through. So you wouldn't even find a respect of the seconds time frame. In most cases, what you'll find is the equilibrium is perfectly tapped on seconds POIs. And so as you come into this, once you start seeing that we're pulling away from that, you can usually hit the button and take an aggressive trade. So in this case, let's show you what the high probability 5S looks like in this case. So we tap into the 1 minute, refined into the 15-second, right? So what we're looking for now is an aggressive recovery, an aggressive reaction as a response to that zone. So on the 5-second, leading into that, we have this sell to buy that pushed price into the 15-second zone. This is the last sell to buy price action that pushed into here. And so we can expect this demand zone, right, to be basically taken out. And so the 5-second change of character, this basically we take the high and then we take the low. You can see that this demand gets ran through. Basically, the V-shaped recovery gives a direct change of character. That tells us that likely this is going to hold and price is going to be aggressive. We don't know how quick it can run away, so we want to be fast for finding our entry. And so in this case, we make this low and price is already pulling back. What we can wait for is one more 5S basically low to go, right? So kind of confirmation. This would be a confirmation based entry here. So the 5S gets taken here. This low gives this pullback, right? This comes into about the equilibrium, if not the premium, right? So that comes into premium territory. So here we come in above the 50%. And what we see is we have a reaction to that level going short. We take some liquidity. We're pulling back up into this little extreme here. And then here we have a 5S break of structure. Candle body closure below here. At that moment, now we're looking for this to be protected. And so once price comes into here with enough area to protect our high, this is the only high we need to protect, because technically this high broke structure to the downside. And so when we have a body closure below here, we don't have just the wick. So what we can do is we can now take an entry once we can get a 1 pip stop loss in this zone. And so what I'm just looking for is price to come into here. Now it's going to sweep this area because this doesn't have any inducement. Now we don't necessarily want to wait too long for an entry like this. You have to be quick on your feet. So once we get a 1 pip stop loss to cover this high, you hit enter. Here you have confirmation because you have a respect. We have a liquidation into this point of interest. We have an aggressive reaction after the mitigation. We give a change of character. And here we have confirmation through a 5-second break of structure. That's the entry we take. And you can see that we travel away from that very quickly. And price runs through all the way down. Oops, don't want to move that here. Let's lock it. You could even get a re-entry with the 1 minute in there somewhere, right? Price comes down, taps into the equilibrium, and even then continues and liquidates that 4-hour week or that 4-hour demand, right? So that would be a 55R trade with a 1 pip stop loss using the second. So there was plenty of opportunities. If you took trades in Asian session, hopefully, or whether you haven't taken trades or you have during Asian session, hopefully it opens your eyes onto how you can trade Asian session. And hopefully this specific example shows you that refining your points of interest is very important. Sometimes we can find entries that we normally would not, simply by just focusing on refining our points of interest a little bit further. Sometimes you'll notice that we're going to miss potential entries. For example, if you were the person that was waiting for this 4-hour to be tapped and you didn't have any refinements, you would have not had a single trade. If you were waiting for this 4-hour to be tapped, you're still going to be waiting for next week because we didn't even come into that. But we did come into a 16-minute refined point of interest slightly underneath, but it's still inside the 4-hour. That gave us our entry here, right? We took an entry in Asian session to take a short down here, right? Let's look at that one again, just a quick preview, just to see what it looks like in here. This was our 1 minute Asian session entry, right? Then we have our tap and respect of a 15-second point of interest inside the 15-minute. And that's where we have a potential trade in New York. That was the New York entry. And then this would be the entry based off of the seconds on London session. So, and that's the same point of interest that, I had marked out in the pre-session markups. So hopefully you can use that. Hopefully this video makes sense to you and you learned something here. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for sticking around watching my videos, and I'll catch you for the next one. Have lots of good videos dropping soon now that I'm better from COVID. So wish you guys a great weekend. Talk soon.